I went into Alien Covenant with pretty high expectations. I didn't have specific things that I wanted to see or homages that I wanted to see to the original Alien movies, but in general I was looking forward very much to seeing, in effect, the first official Ridley Scott Alien movie since the original '79 film. Because of course since then we've had some great ones like Aliens, but not that were directed by him. And of course we've had some which are mixed. Alien 3 for instance, personally I like that movie, I like the dark tone that it has, but I don't enjoy it as much as the first two. And then you've got Alien Resurrection. I don't love that movie, I don't hate it as much as some films that I've seen, because as with some other movie monsters such as The Predator, The Thing, various others as well, I love the character so much that even if it's a bad movie, I will still savour the opportunity of seeing the character in a new environment. And it doesn't necessarily need to be a good environment for me to like seeing the character. It's like seeing an old friend. Even if you see an old friend in a bad situation, you're still happy to see them. Or at least that's the way it is for me. Now, I'm certainly not saying that Alien Resurrection is a great film, but still. Now, I wanted to give myself a few days before putting out this review, because of course I don't need to put out reviews for movies immediately after they're released, because it's not like I'm clamouring for views against Chris Stuckman and Jeremy Johns or various other guys. That's just not the way it works. But I wanted to give myself a few days to think whether or not I actually liked this movie, loved this movie, didn't like this movie, various other feelings that can come into play, because for me personally, and I'm sure this is similar if not the same for you guys as well, it often takes me a few days or even a few weeks to know how I really feel about a film. Sometimes I may not initially like a film and then grow to love it. Other times it can be the exact opposite. A movie like Split, for instance, which is still my favourite movie of this year so far. I watched it the first time, enjoyed it, second time I enjoyed it even more, and then over the weeks after the film really, I liked it more and more, to the point where now, as I said, it's my favourite film of the year. So I wanted to give this movie the opportunity to sink in and to decide what my feelings really were. So what do I think of it? Well, as an Alien fan, in particular of the first film, I do prefer Alien over Aliens. I prefer the straight up claustrophobic sci-fi horror to the action horror of the second film. So which is this more like? Well, I would say the biggest piece of advice that I could give to someone who is an Alien fan and who maybe hasn't seen the film yet for whatever reasons, to go into the movie not expecting Alien 2 as far as Ridley Scott's concerned, but expect Prometheus 2. Now, there are some people who, as soon as I say that, are turned off, because there are a lot of people who do not like Prometheus. Personally, I do. I view it as totally different to the Alien films, and there's not much point in comparing it to them, because it's a different style, it has different pacing, different characters. Of course there are flaws in there, but there are with any film. So, I personally like Prometheus. I don't love it, but I do like it. Now, the way, without spoiling anything specific of course, that I would say this is more like a sequel to Prometheus rather than a sequel to Alien, isn't necessarily in terms of the specific story or the specific style of the film, but more in the tone that the film has. The world feels like the Prometheus universe more so than the Alien universe. Now technically they're one and the same, but we all know they don't feel the same. Prometheus feels almost too clean and too crisp, considering that it is of course supposed to be set before the Alien movie, and yet the technology looks better than in that film. So it's kind of inconsistent there, but of course it comes from a different era. Ridley Scott decided to change up the design for whatever reasons, and that's just the way it is. This movie has more of that slick look that Prometheus has, rather than the very dated but still very good looking style that Alien has. And the world, as I said, feels much more like Prometheus, at least to me. It feels a lot bigger than Alien, and it feels a lot bigger than Aliens as well. Both films are relatively contained, if you actually think about it. The second is slightly bigger, but it's still a very contained movie, whereas in this one you've got space travel, multiple years of travel in cryosleep, all that kind of stuff, which you typically wouldn't get in a straight-up Alien film. So I would say, for those reasons, and some others as well, that this is more like a sequel to Prometheus first, and then a new Alien movie second. That being said, did I like it or not? Well, overall, I like it, but I don't love it. There wasn't anything in particular that I hated about the movie. There was one thing which I didn't like as much, and it's not a spoiler, it's more a movie making point of view, and this is something which anyone who has watched my other reviews will probably guess, and that is special effects. When I go to see an Alien film, I want to see real aliens. I don't want to see CGI aliens. And unfortunately, that's what they all are in this movie. Now, there are 3 different types of aliens in the film. You've got the traditional chest bursters, the xenomorphs, you've got neck bursters, and you've also got back bursters. I can't recall which name is which, but you've got neomorphs, protomorphs, and xenomorphs. Now, the back burster, in particular, was my favourite. I like it even more than the xenomorph. I love the design of the creature. It has a very pale albino kind of look. I believe it's the one which some people were referring to as the beluga alien, and I love it. It's a great creature design. I personally think it's even creepier than the xenomorph. I would say that the xenomorph design is more scary in a pure mechanical efficiency kind of way, in a similar way to how you should have fear in terms of respect for the ocean because of the power that it has. I view the xenomorph in that same kind of way. It's not a creepy creature. Some people would say that it is, but for me it isn't. It's just a creature that's there to kill you, and that's it. There is some sexual imagery associated with it, but I never got that vibe from Alien. To me, it's just purely a mechanical creature. It's almost like a robotic monster in the way it looks, the way it acts, the way it's built, even, in effect. Whereas this new creature, the beluga alien, it's totally different. It's a much more traditional horror design. It doesn't have the pipe work all over it. It doesn't have all the bits and bobs hanging off of it. It doesn't have the drool. It doesn't have the dome head. It's pale, it's simple, and to me, it's creepier, in a similar way to how the Babadook, for instance, would compare to something like Jaws. Jaws is scary, but not really creepy, whereas the Babadook is more creepy. Or at least that's the way I see it. So for me, although I did love aspects of the new designs, and some of it was very gory, which is great to see, but at the same time, the moments where the gore happens, or where you see the creatures in general, kind of felt a little bit undercut to me because of the fact that you could tell, even subconsciously, that they're CGI. So at the end of the day, you know that they're not actually there. And of course, a practical effect still isn't a real creature, but to me they just don't compare. If you can actually see a tangible creation in a room, be it a guy in a suit or be it an animatronic, that will always trump CGI for me. It's better every single time. Even bad animatronics, to me, are far superior to the best CGI. I would much rather have that tangible creature that you can actually believe is there, because it is there. It's not superimposed afterward. As far as story goes, there were elements that I liked, elements that I didn't like. And again, without spoiling anything, if you are a fan of Prometheus, I think you will love this film, because it takes things from Prometheus and turns them up to 11, certain characters in particular. And I loved that aspect of the film. People have been saying about Michael Fassbender's performance as 2 different androids, and that's not a spoiler, you can see it in the promotional material, as both David and also Walter, the other robot in this movie as well. And he is worthy of that praise. He gives a fantastic performance, and in my opinion, he's the best actor in the film in terms of the performances that he gives. But more specifically, as far as story goes, I found that that was a point where I had issues as well, because on the first watching, I was taking it all in, enjoying being in Ridley Scott's specific alien world again, and that was great. The second time, though, I found myself wanting the movie to kind of get on with it around the midway point. It slows up quite a bit. The beginning of the movie takes a little while to get going, and although of course you want to set up the characters, you want to set up the tone, create a little bit of tension, That's all well and good, but the original Alien is not a fast-paced movie to begin with, but it's still interesting. It's not boring at all. This movie, to me, has points where it felt like you could have cut entire scenes out, and it wouldn't have hurt the film. You could have made it maybe 5 or 10 minutes shorter at least, and helped that pacing, at least for me. Don't get me wrong, I love long movies. Some of my favourite movies are very long, like Ben-Hur, for instance. So it's not that I have an issue with. It's more the fact that it felt like dead air sometimes. Overall, though, I think this is a movie where rewatchability is going to be a little bit hurt for me personally because of that pacing, and also because of the fact that the CGI is ever present when the aliens are there, and that always undercuts it for me. It's not bad CGI, I just don't like it in principle, and that's a personal thing. And those two things combined will kind of dent the rewatchability, at least for me. Is it a bad film? No, definitely not. If you're an Alien fan, there are definitely at least things in there which you will enjoy very much, if not the whole thing. I think this is the kind of movie where some people will thoroughly enjoy every second of the film, and you don't necessarily need to be a die-hard Alien fan to enjoy it thoroughly. It's just a good film in that way, but at the same time, you can have someone which doesn't enjoy everything, as with any movie, and I'm more in that camp. There are certain things which I loved, other things, as I've mentioned, that I didn't. But overall, that brings us to our individual scores, and first of all we have, of course, the story and the plot. And for the story and plot of Alien Covenant, I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10, because although the story wasn't incredible, it was a character-based story, and the characters are good for the most part. Some of them feel a little bit expendable, but that's the way it should be. You want some people just to act as fodder, but at the same time, enough time is devoted to most of them that you do care a lot more for them than in most other horror films. They drive that story, and although we'll get to the characters more in just a second, they did make the story elevated. They made it better. There are some high concept ideas in the movie, just like in Prometheus, and in that way it felt, again, more like Prometheus and the world of Prometheus than the world of Alien. It felt almost like Prometheus with aliens in there. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, that's just not necessarily what I was expecting of the film. So overall, it's a 7 from me. As far as those characters, the motivations, the portrayals of the actors, as I said, I enjoyed it, and again I'm going to give it another 7, because it's so tied in for me to the story in this film. The characters often are separate to a story. You can have awful characters with a great story, or you can have a rubbish story elevated by great characters. In this movie, they're so connected. It's about these people, it's about the way they feel, it's about the questions they ask, and so they're both tied very closely together. So as I said, I'm giving that a 7 out of 10 as well. I already mentioned some of my favourite performances, and of course that contributes also to that score. As far as the visuals, special effects, well, we've touched on that with regard to CGI, but don't get me wrong, I didn't dislike the special effects. I would have preferred practical effects just for the creatures. And it really is just for the creatures. I have no problem whatsoever with anything else visually in the film. I think Ridley Scott has an amazing eye for making gorgeous looking films. The original Alien, as I said, I love the look that it has. It's dated, but it still looks great. And this one as well, just like Prometheus, has amazing worlds, and they feel real. The designs of the ships, the designs of the characters, they all look fantastic. They're very imaginative, very creative, while simultaneously paying great homages to, of course, the original movie. So overall for me, I'm giving it a pretty strong 9 out of 10 for visuals, and that may be surprising given what I said about the aliens, but to be honest, were they practical effects more than CGI? Not necessarily totally practical effects, but at least if we could have had some actual practical effects in there with the CGI featured more predominantly, then it would have been a perfect 10 for me, because everything else does look fantastic. But still, a 9 certainly isn't a bad score. As far as the audio, the soundtrack, etc., again, I'm going to give it a pretty high score of 8 out of 10. Now, I heard some chatter from people who are Alien fans who didn't like the soundtrack, because they felt that it was recycled from the original Alien. I don't get that logic. Why is that a bad thing? If you had an amazing soundtrack in the film, and it's the same universe with the same guy who created that world, why shouldn't he use that music again? If it was good the first time, why wouldn't it be good the second time? But maybe that's just something down to personal preference. But for me overall, I love the soundtrack, I love the music. Sometimes the music felt more like sound effects rather than traditional music, and I love that kind of thing. I love it when music feels like a character rather than, well, music overlaid over the top of the film. And in Alien and Alien Covenant, it does feel that way. So overall, it's an 8 from me. And finally, for the rewatchability and the entertainment factor, you may be thinking that the score's not going to be great, because as I mentioned, the pacing hurt it a little bit for me, the CGI, etc. But I'm still going to give it a 7 out of 10, because I can't stress this enough. It's not a bad movie. I did not dislike this film. It's just one of those movies which I know I'm not going to rewatch a lot. Certainly not as much as the original Alien film. That kind of goes without saying. But still, there are some movies which I might really respect or really love, but still not watch that often. Something like a great war film. Some people might pop that in and watch it every week. Most people, though, won't. Something like Saving Private Ryan, for instance. It's a great movie in some particular ways, but you're not necessarily going to watch it every day. You just respect it for what it did. Now, this isn't necessarily a landmark film, but what it did well, and I enjoyed those things. At the same time, though, it's not something which I'll revisit all the time. In terms of group rewatchability, well, it's a movie that I would recommend watching specifically if you have a group who want to watch it. Because if you have a group of people watching a film like this, in a similar way to Prometheus, because it does have a slower burn than a traditional monster movie, people will get bored and start talking. So it's not really that kind of film. If you're watching it on your own, there's definitely rewatchability for some people, not as much for others. For a group, I would steer clear of this film, unless, as I said, the group specifically chose to watch this movie knowing what they're getting into. So overall, it's a solid 7 from me, and that means that overall, as a tabulation of those 5 categories put together, I'm giving Alien Covenant still a perfectly respectable 3.8 out of 5. That's not a bad score at all. That's a similar kind of level to what I would give some other underappreciated horror films, some movies which I just like in general. That's kind of a good score. It's not a great score, but it's a good one. And that is, of course, lower than I gave to the original Alien, which is as you'd expect it to be. So my overall verdict is, if you're an Alien fan, check it out, but go in with measured expectations. Don't expect it to be better than the original. Don't even expect it to be as good as the original 2 movies. But go in expecting a slower pace, and you might just enjoy it. But that's it overall for this particular review. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.